This is a very brief look into the research that I conducted in Uganda with SIT last spring. But before I get into that, I feel it's important to address the popularized concern about albinism in Uganda right now. And many people have heard about the huntings in Uganda, which have claimed the lives of between 66 and 200 people. But although these are acts of atrocious violence, I want to stress that number one, they're a recent development, and starting around 2007, they're perpetrated by a very small number of individuals in the Lake Victoria region, which you see above me. And they're also by no means supported by and large outside of that market. However, this business is unfortunately incredibly lucrative. So I'm not trying to trivialize the death of any person, and a part of my work was in developing ways to address this concern. But before these killings began and after they end, persons from albinism will have and have had much more to fear surrounding the sun and their condition, and the fear surrounding their condition. So there are multiple types of albinism, but for brevity and clarity, I'm going to be talking about alkyl or cutaneous albinism. And it refers to a genetic condition in which little to no melanin pigment is produced by the body, and it's a recessive trait requiring the presence in both parents. And most albino persons are born to non-albino people, and they produce non-albino children. So the current definition of a person with disability, according to the Persons with Disability Act in Uganda, is a person having physical, intellectual, sensory, or mental impairments that substantially limit one or more of the major life activities of that person. And current definitions, this is congruent with the definition of medical disability. While most persons with albinism are visually impaired, resulting from the lack of iris pigmentation, they have poor eyesight, and it also hinders them. It doesn't hinder them from fully participating in life activities. Additionally, the inability to produce melanin does make persons with albinism more susceptible to skin cancer, but this limitation can be easily remedied, and that's done through glasses for the vision, sunscreen, and protective clothing for the skin. So the condition, because of the way it's perceived and treated in albinism, still causes substantial limitation, but it's not technically this form of medical disability. And apart from the environmental dangers of living on the equator, there are a number of other issues with Uganda and East Africa that cause concern. Accurate statistics are not available, but there's no doubting a significantly higher rate of albinism in Eastern Africa as opposed to places of Europe. And additionally, there's a significant difference between tropical countries and the rest of the world when it comes to their life expectancy. It's about 30 years in East Africa and tropical countries versus about an average lifespan in other countries, and this is due to skin cancer. Tropical climate, high altitude, a geographic position on the equator, means that Uganda's environment is particularly lethal to those who are unable to process UV rays. But even if the medical disability is addressed through sunscreen prevention, those things like that, social disability persists, and it's the social disability which I'll be talking about, and it is what is so deadly in Uganda. So how does it affect persons with albinism? Disability results from the interactions between persons with impairments and attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society on equal basis with others. This is social handicap, and it's a new way of looking at disability, not as a personal problem to be dealt with by the individual, but as a problem for society to address and to prevent full participation of its members. Despite a progressive constitution, Uganda does not actually incorporate it, and neither do most of East Africans into their knowledge of disability. And the attitudinal barriers that hinder persons with albinism are pervasive in Ugandan society and stem from a vast amount of misunderstanding and fear associated with the condition. It's important to note that issues of discrimination that I'll be talking about are a lot more prevalent in the rural areas. So I'm going to break down the three major stages of a person's life and show you how negative myths associated with the condition impact persons with albinism's participation in major life activities. From the very entrance into the world, they confront fear regarding the condition. Some are killed outright, while others are abandoned or hidden. This has to do with fear of the child being a curse to the family. It also has to do with the financial burden that is placed having a child of this disability. So most people do not publicly own up to having a child with a disability. They're left at home, put in the back. And to say that a person with albinism does survive, say that someone does survive the first few years of life, they face incredible obstacles going to school. So first off, as aforementioned, many families are too humiliated to take them through school. Additionally, when it comes to spending money and precious resources on sending your children to school, they're not usually going to use it on a child who they see as a disability or a waste of money, not valued by society, and who may die soon. Yet, even if the parents are progressive or wealthy enough to send their child to school, there are more obstacles, harassment and bullying that they face. Also, aside from malicious intent, the teacher just might not know how to deal with this condition. This is a picture of a school in rural Uganda, and you can see where the child would just have difficulties staying out of the sun. So let's make obvious the fact that as we progress through these stages, less and less persons with albinism actually get to each stage. On the completion of school, a person with albinism faces further discrimination to get into the workplace once they're inside. And on paper, a person with albinism looks so different than any other applicant, but once they get to the hiring stages of the interview process, they stand out and not in a good way. So multiple people I talked to, they explain potential employers to dismiss them because they might scare away customers, they might die at any moment, or that they're just inhirable as a result of their condition. Those who are hired express a constant fear of losing their position. Sexual harassment in the workplace is horrifically common in Uganda, and women with albinism face particularly directed harassment, which is at least in part exacerbated by the uncertain condition of their position. So through multiple sources I learned that male coworkers or bosses were fascinated with those women with albinism, wanted to see if they taste sweeter. Women will feel trapped, they'll give in. Some of them see it just as the final stage they have to get through in order to keep their jobs. And though men might have a secret fascination with albino women, they actually hold a relationship or marry one is absolutely not looked highly upon, and the situation is only slightly better for males. So what's needed? We need decreased exposure to the sun for persons with albinism, and that comes from increased exposure to health education for both the person with albinism and their families. The general public also needs increased exposure to the condition in order to prevent and combat negative stereotypes. There must be recognition by the government of social disability, which allows for persons with albinism to seek programs and protection under the law. There must also be aggressive and proactive protection against these albino hunters. And finally, there must be increased support for organizations such as African Albino Foundation of Uganda, which is working with the country to make sure that these steps are accomplished. So in conclusion, I'd like to remind you that these people I spoke to you about today are people first, and that in the future you'll think of them in that way with albinism second.